Okay, so we're going to talk today about how to talk about your technology without giving away the secret sauce. Our panel today is Connie Chen from Wolf, Greenfield and Sachs, a premier boutique intellectual law firm, Beth Khan from MIT, from the Innovation Core node there, Ling Shen from the Umass Amherst Tech Transfer Office, and Nelly van Dessel, Chief Executive Officer and co-founder at Ernest Pharmaceutical. I'm going to take their pictures down and we're going to start the discussion. So please, if you have questions, welcome everybody. Please, if you have questions, put them into the chat or raise your hand and we'll get to them as we can. But we're going to start off today with an individual question to each of our panelists because we've got four different and unique and important perspectives on this topic. And we're going to start with Ling Shen, who is a licensing officer, a senior licensing officer at the Umass Tech Transfer Office. Ling has been at Umass Amherst for a number of years. Prior to joining the TTO, she spent 8 years in the biotech industry in Cambridge, where she served as in scientific and managerial positions. In 2002, she joined Hybridon as Director of Scientific Affairs, and where she marketed to universities and research institutes worldwide, building research collaborations there. She's got a PhD in chemistry from the University of California, Berkeley, and an MBA from UMass Amherst. Welcome, Ling. It feels a bit unnatural to start with you because we usually start with visitors and guests, but we're going to start with you because the TTO is often the first stop for faculty and students who have invented something on campus or are thinking that they might have secret sauce. So I'm going to ask you to please offer some advice to faculty members and graduate students who are right at the start of that process, applying for funding, who may wish to include some inventive concept or some preliminary data that might be secret sauce, but they haven't disclosed it yet to the TTO. Give us your guidance on that. How should they treat that secret sauce in grant applications and those sorts of documents?
Sure. Thank you very much, Karen, for your introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. At the Tech Transfer Office, I handle invention evaluation, protection, marketing, and licensing. And so please feel free to email me or any of my colleagues at the Tech Transfer Office if you have any invention or intellectual property related questions. With regard to how to handle the inclusion of an invention or inventive concept in a research proposal to be submitted to a funding agency or entity, the best approach will be to inform the Tech Transfer Office of such invention or inventive concept prior to finalizing the proposal so that we can provide specific feedback and advice based on your situation, because every situation is different, every invention is different. So a short invention disclosure form can be downloaded from the Tech Transfer Office website. And upon receipt of your invention disclosure, we can contact you to learn more about your invention or inventive concept and provide specific advice. Generally speaking, in the research or project proposal, it would be good to focus on describing the beneficial outcome that your research can generate. And if an invention needs to be described in the proposal, but has not already been patent protected or made publicly known, then it would be good to focus on describing the advantages of your invention over existing technologies rather than describing specific steps for making or using such invention. And it is usually fine to include preliminary data in the proposal as long as such data do not teach others how to make or use your invention. And certain funding agencies may require a more detailed description of your inventive concept. And if the funding agency or entity makes it clear in writing that the proposal submission and the review processes are confidential, and then you will not need to be too concerned about including more detailed information on your on your inventive concept in the proposal. And some faculty members asked questions before about, even if the funding agency says, oh, this process is confidential, then how do I know that the reviewers won't disclose my ideas to others? But I think in a situation like that, I think we need to basically think the best of others. That's my view, my personal view. We need to think the best of others, and we need to think, basically consider all these reviewers are very ethical individuals, unless there's specific reasons that will make us to think otherwise. So that's my.
Thank you, Ling. So I think to me, the takeaway there is when in doubt, talk to the tech transfer office. Many people think you don't need to do that until you're going to maybe go present at a scientific conference. But one of the great things about our TTO on campus is that they're really focused on helping you. And I urge you all to reach out. Next, we're going to ask, I want to introduce Tony Chen. Tony, some of you know, he has been generous enough to voluntarily do some intellectual property law office hours for us, and we're really appreciative. And I think this is the second panel you've served on, so we're really appreciative of all your time and effort supporting UMass faculty and student inventors and entrepreneurs. So just a little background on Tony. He is an IP attorney. He counsels clients in patent prosecution in a wide variety of areas, including biomolecular engineering, nanotechnology, tissue engineering, drug delivery, fuel cells, chemical processes, and analytical devices. Tony is particularly focused on small business and university research and has helped companies develop strong IP protection based on their business goals and potential threats from competitors. Tony particularly enjoys working with startup companies to help strengthen their competitive positions in the marketplace through patent prosecution, trade secret protection, diligence of competitor interests, identification of white space and potential barriers to entry, and the like. He holds an SCD in chemical engineering from MIT and a JD from Suffolk University Law School. Tony, as an IP attorney, beyond patents, which everybody knows are legal tools, what legal tools for protecting the secret sauce should founders be aware of when they're just starting out?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on this panel. I really appreciate it. To answer your question, the most common form is the NDA, or non-disclosure agreement. It's an agreement that's typically signed between parties that they agree to keep information confidential. Broadly speaking, they're sort of broken down into one-way and two-way NDAs. A two-way NDA basically means that anything I tell you is confidential, anything you tell me is confidential. A one-way NDA is sort of a one-way direction where, maybe everything you tell me is confidential, but I don't have any obligation to return that confidentiality to you. So you have to be a little careful on those. Those are one of the more common legal tools that people will use in advance of these sort of discussions. But the thing to keep in mind is they do have some limitations. There's only so much that they can do. They work because of the legal process. So basically what happens if somebody violates confidentiality, you have a legal document that says they're in violation, it's a contract dispute, you end up going into court and suing them for breach of contract and that sort of thing. In some cases that might be adequate, but in other cases that might not actually be enough for you. So if you have some important secret sauce and you tell your next door neighbor who loves to put stuff on the internet and they put it on the internet, you might have signed an NDA with them, but that information is already on the internet and you can't really get it off the internet what's on the internet, right? This is something that everybody always says, once it's on the internet, it stays on the internet. And so the legal process might not be enough for what you need. So you have to think about other things as well. So an NDA, it's not a silver bullet. It's certainly very useful. It's very important. It tells the parties that this is important to keep in mind. But you also have to think about other approaches as well. The one I always tell people is just basic common sense. Do you trust the person that you're giving this information to? Maybe it's too soon for that. Maybe you want to tell them a little bit about maybe your business strategy, but not the details. You want to get that level of trust before you're willing to share some of the more important elements with them, because you really don't know how they're going to respond, and you really don't know what they're going to do with that information, whether it's legal or not. And you don't want that to override common sense.
That is great advice, Tony. Thank you. Next, we're going to talk to Beth Khan. Beth is Associate Director of the New England Innovation Node at MIT. That's an I-Core node, but that is actually not why I am excited to have her on the panel. She's formerly the Senior VP of Operations at eBand Communications. She has over 25 years of leadership experience in the telecom industry, beginning her career at Bell Labs in North Andover. She's held senior positions in engineering, manufacturing, marketing, and sales, with global responsibilities for engineering and marketing, where scaling bleeding edge technologies was a constant. So eBand Technologies was a maker of high frequency point-to-point radios. She was the 5th employee there, and she built the entire operation from the ground up. She's an active mentor, faculty member, and instructor as part of several research-based translation programs. Beth holds an SM in mechanical engineering from MIT. Welcome, Beth. And based on your experience as a senior leader in a tech company, eBand, or any other senior executive experience, what management practices should founders be aware of from the get-go in terms of protecting the secret sauce as their company is adding employees, bringing in partners, suppliers, and so forth?
Well, thank you, and hello, everybody. So I'm gonna probably emphasize a little more, Karen, the partner supplier than the employee right now. And I think the thing that you need to think about to learn is practice paranoia. All right, so you don't want to be completely paranoid, but as a small company, right? Maybe there's 2, 3, 4 of you, even 10 of you. I'm speaking from that point of view. You're really small, and almost everybody else you're going to work with is big, right? And so, being careful about which partner you choose, et cetera, is important. But just the nature of the discussions that you have, I think you always need to be trying to get more than you give. And I'm not suggesting that partnerships aren't helpful. You just have to understand if there's a power imbalance. But I think it's a tough thing when you're the small fish and everybody else is a big fish. But you're going to need to project. So like Tani was just saying, you have to be able to tell some people where you're headed as a business, right? And that doesn't have to be, here's my exact product roadmap. I think some of the biggest challenges are when, and in my background, this was, hardware with fancy software and fancy chips. But, engineers like to talk to other engineers. Technologists like to talk to other technologists and share things. And, it's okay, but you need to help people understand, don't be so forthcoming. I mean, this is an ongoing challenge, I think, for scientists, researchers, and engineers, because your natural thing is to share. So suppliers, I have lots of great stories about suppliers, but it's all about being clear on what you want from that relationship, and then thinking about the kind of information that you're exchanging. So honestly, listening is one of your best tools here in any of these relationships. I think, like I said, Karen, I think employees are in a little bit different kind of bucket. And I'll just following up on Tony, non-disclosure agreements from my standpoint are important documents, but they do not mean that you should tell people everything, right? So only what they need to know, right? Kind of a thing. So I'm just to be clear, a non-disclosure is important. It declares the turf. But don't think it's a, kryptonite vest or anything for you, because it's not. So happy to, talk more about any of this. Thank you.
Yeah, I think employees go both ways. They're both sources of leakage of sauce, as well as they need to know some things, so they can be a challenge. So hopefully we'll get back to that in a bit. Our last panelist, I'm very pleased to see. I haven't seen Nelly Van Dessel in a while. Many of you may know her. She is co-founder and CEO of Earnest Pharmaceuticals. Earnest Pharmaceuticals' aim is to create a novel bacterial platform that will revolutionize cancer treatment success through innovations in intracellular macromolecule delivery. And they have come an amazing way, and we're really pleased of them as a UMass Amherst startup. Their efforts are based on foundational work from the Forbes lab and Professor Neil Forbes in chemical engineering at UMass Amherst. The company's focus will be on tumors with low survival rates, such as liver, pancreas, ovarian, and metastatic breast cancer. So they're taking on some of the toughest challenges in oncology. Prior to her leadership role at Earnest, Dr. Van Dessel was a postdoctoral researcher in the Forbes lab and developed the bacterial delivery platform. She has a master's degree in bioengineering and her PhD in biomedical sciences from, I'm not even sure how to pronounce it. Is it KU Leuven? KU Leuven.
Yes.
In Leuven, Belgium. Welcome, Nelly. We're so glad to have you back here. You've been recently, in the last few years, put into a lot of situations where you need to talk about your science and your business without necessarily sharing anything confidential. This goes venture pitches, talking with other scientists, a whole range. How do you think about, before you go into one of those communication situations, how do you think about doing this? And then how do you think about it while you're actually in the midst of communicating information that will get people excited, which is, after all, what you want?
Well, I must admit, I was one of those blabbing scientists / engineers that did not want to do anything but talk about their science. So I agree that once we went from, hey, we're only going to talk about this on to other scientists and you want to tell them every single detail because it's so cool, to going to business where it's like, no, don't tell anyone anything, and you become completely paranoid. It was quite of a balance, finding a nice way in between. I certainly started with being way too paranoid. It's also having a trust in the documents you have. Like if we file provisionals, and that means that it's disclosed and ready to be patented. That means that we can talk about it. That doesn't mean that we're going to let everybody completely look under the hood, give them all our constructs and everything, but we can talk about the idea behind the technology. So when I go into these meetings, for me, it really matters which. So we currently have 2 pipeline products and they have different grades of protection. And so one is an executing patent. So it means it's published, it's in the open domain. Like I can talk freely about that, and I will, and in detail. But once I go to the products that are in provisionals or technologies and in provisionals, I'll be slightly more held back. I will talk about the concepts, but not about the specifics of it. I will, talk about what it does rather than how it works. One of the things that we also included was giving things illustrious names, such as Earnest bacterial vectors, rather than plasmid that does this and this and this, which makes it easier to talk about rather what it does than what it is. And then also one of the hardest things I need to learn is if you want to talk about this more, we'll have to sign an NDA. And then even once we've signed an NDA, I completely agree with what Tani said. If we're just having initial conversations, I'm not giving you anything. I will tell you about this. I will tell you some more details about our work, but only once we start to do due diligence and we see that the process is actually going to lead to a term sheet, or at least negotiations about a term sheet, is when we start disclosing, more of the safety data, more of how it exactly works, and let them look under the hood. And even then, I will only try to respond to questions as they are asked with minimal amounts of information. That does not mean that I want to stop the collaboration. To give you an example, we're working with Boehringer Ingelheim on coming up with a working plan to develop our bacteria for animal health. We signed an NDA and they're currently working with us, and we had to like show them a lot of what we've done. But that doesn't mean that I like gave them all my plasmids. Those are things that we keep close, like plasmid information and all of that. There's things we don't publish, we don't give out. So we keep the tools close, but the mechanisms we're much more open to discuss about, dependent on the level of protection we have. And I think one of the things I learned really well is like, what is in each patent / provisional, what is protected and what is not, and what is published and what is not. Because a lot of the mechanisms that we lean against are in the public domain. And so some of them you can hint at it without giving away the full store. But it takes practice. And I was very paranoid.
So thank you, Nelly. That was a great answer. And I especially love that you ended with, it takes practice. And that you went from being maybe not paranoid enough to maybe too paranoid. And now you, as you gain experience, you are sort of finding the right level for each conversation.
I'd like to add something else, Karen. Sorry. I think it's also how long you've existed. At this point, we've been a company for almost 5 years. Some of the things we've developed, even if you read all our articles and do all our work, it will take you 2 to 3 years to catch up. And I think having that advance, we did not publish anything for the first 6 years that we were working on this. We really kept this close, but it gave us a head start in having the materials and having the experience. And I think at some point you just have to trust that I mean, you still have to do all the precautionary things, but also like have trust that your knowledge, your experience, and how you work has value in addition to your IP protection.
So that's a great jumping off point, and I'm going to insert a question in here. We have, just for everyone who's here, we have some questions we want to cover, but please put your own questions in the chat, because we want this to be, and we will ask you to unmute then and ask your question, because we want this to be a conversation. But just to jump off of what Nelly just said, so you're thinking about your patents, but you're also thinking about lots of other stuff. And I'm wondering if, for everyone, how you think about what the secret sauce is. Very often at the beginning, you think of it as what's going into the patent. But what I'm hearing you say, Nelly, and I'd love to hear from everyone, how do you think about secret sauce and from each of your own perspectives? And Beth, please.
Yeah, Nelly, I love the way you express this. And this is how I think about the question you just asked. If I think about sharing what it is I need or I'm looking for versus why I need it or want it, I think that's just a really good filter. So, you know, my real problem might be I want to take the cost of a waveguide, you know, from $45 to under 10. But I probably don't want to say that directly. I'm looking for a need to be able to create, say, a channel of a certain, you know, dimension. And I'd like to do that with 3D additive kind of stuff. So I like that a lot. Think about what it is I need and telling people what you need versus the justification of why you need it. Thank you for that, Nelly. I think that was great. So that's kind of how I think about separating secret sauce a little bit.
So, Tani, when one of your clients comes to you and says, "I'm getting ready for a big meeting with someone, on what would you advise me to share, and what would you advise me is the secret sauce that where I should just stop talking?" How do you get beyond the patents? And I know your bio says that you work in trade secrets. I'm assuming those should never be shared, but there's an in-between, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. And it's one of those things, you know, again, you sort of have to have a certain level of trust, and, you know, how Nelly expressed that, you know, makes a lot of sense to me. I know, like, even on the patent side, there's sort of secret sauces that you might sort of have embedded in a patent application, but you can make it in a way that's very difficult to figure out. So for example, if you have something like waveguides or something like that, you might have 100 different types of waveguides and materials and dimensions and so forth listed in the application. So even if they know you're working on waveguides, it's hard to read the application, know exactly what that secret sauce is. So even that information, even if it's out there, might not be enough for them to figure it out. And yeah, they can figure it out. And as Nelly said, it might take them 2 years of trial and error to figure out exactly where you are. That's still something that offers a huge advantage to you. That gives you that 2-year head start, and that the patent documents might not help them much. Right. So if they can't get the information from that, then the other information they can get it is from what you tell them. And that's where you need to be the most careful, because you might actually give away something that could shortcut a year of research. Right? So instead of 2 to 3 years, now it's only 1 to 2 years, and that puts them that much closer to behind you. Even if they don't have all of the details, they can kind of figure out the rest. So that part you have to be very careful, and there isn't a sort of hard and fast rule or a bright line of here's exactly when you've gone too far, because you might be talking to some people who are smart enough to figure out what all the missing pieces are.
Yeah, people are smart. I think that's actually something that's really important to keep in mind. So Ling, you are at the university where, of course, everybody is, the idea is knowledge. How do you help faculty think about this, even as they are wanting to publish, encouraging student dissertations that are going to be public? Do you get into this question of secret sauce at all?
To unmute myself first. Yeah, I think true secret sauce is something that a startup company or established company has and should be always kept as secret sauce. I think should never be disclosed. True secret sauce, I'm talking about things like trade secrets. But at a university setting, we don't really have, with regard to research findings and things like that. I do not consider those as trade secrets. And because we don't use that information to gain an economic advantage over Umass competitors, we don't. So these information will eventually be in the public domain through publications of research papers, dissertations, public presentations, either oral or poster presentations, and even through publications of patent applications filed by the university. So, but however, before an invention is evaluated by the tech transfer office, if there is an invention or inventive concept, I think, as I mentioned previously, I think it would be important for our researchers to disclose that to our office so we can help make an evaluation. And we will basically assess commercial potential and patentability of the invention. And if the outcome is positive, then we will invest in obtaining patent protection for the invention. And hopefully, the public disclosure will be made after TTO has the opportunity to do such assessment and take actions in protecting commercializable and patentable inventions.
Okay, thank you. Jose LaSalle has a question. And Jose, it's great to see you here. I'm going to ask you to unmute and ask the question that you've put into the chat.
Thank you, Karen. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Do you have advice, this is to the collective, advice for a non-university affiliated company engaging with university professors for sponsored research, namely sharing information ahead of getting an MNDA, and then even after with a mutual non-disclosure, sharing information ahead of the eventual IP agreement? Any considerations?
So you are, I mean, I know your company, so I know that you are engaging with multiple universities, and so you're really thinking about sort of the opposite direction, getting all the intellectual firepower of university professors to bring that goodness into your company. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes. And
and then how do you do that while still maintaining your secret sauce?
Exactly. Yeah, thank you, Karen. Also great to see you again, Beth.
Hello there. So since you said hello, Jose. You know, it's an interesting thing. My brain, I'm not an academic, but my brain goes to, I would think it's fairly easy for a non-university affiliated company to come and learn stuff from lots of professors by sponsoring research. I mean, they're getting paid. I think that's right there is a big help, at least from my standpoint. I think it kind of goes back to, you know, what mission you are laying out for them as a part of that research, right? I mean, you could be giving the same mission to a bunch, you could be giving, you know, scope of work slightly different to many. So I'm not sure which scenario you're thinking about, but I'm sure the other panelists have more hands-on experience here.
Do you mind if I add something, Karen?
Please, just jump in.
So we have contracts with Umass. So Ernest Pharmaceutical is not in any way related to Umass anymore. We're an independent company, but we do have subcontract work with Umass. So we set up this way to like, what is IP, what is not, what is Ernest IP, what is Umass IP, where do we have joint IP? One of the things that we made very clear is that if we want to keep the IP in-house, we make it so that the sponsored research with the professor, in this case it's Neil Forbes, we give him the compound. We give him the compound and they test it in mice, they do all the tests that we want, but we give him the compound. And I think at that point, the IP is ours. What comes out of that, the testing and stuff, is data, but there is no, unless they develop new technology to test it, which in our case is not very likely because we're doing a lot of mice testing as previously described, that IP is ours. On the other hand, we have had co-developments where we had a problem and we worked together and then that IP was joint. But this was done by in advance, talking with TTO, like, okay, this is the plan. This is what we like to do. I'm here, you're there. This is the IP we generated. How do we fix this? How do we set this up? And then there's also where, you know, the IP came from UMass and we sub-licensed we licensed the IP and it stays there. I think you really have to think about what do you want to do? What is your IP and how do you want to address it? Also read the contracts. As small companies, it's really hard to get IP from big institutions. Like if you're a DAO and you say like, develop this for me, we want all the IP, here's $200,000, great. But you know, as a small company, you're not a DAO. And so most of the time it's that the universities will hold that IP that they develop or co-develop. So read those contracts in advance and really talk. And there are institutions that are more hawkish or less hawkish than UMass. So I think you have to really read the contracts, read what they want, what they consider IP, and like set your plan up in advance so you know exactly what you're asking. That would be my advice as someone who's like done all three variants of this.
Thank you both.
Yeah, maybe there's one more thing that I like to add is that UMass, of course, works with companies in different ways. So we do sponsor research agreements. Of course, there's a different entity at UMass handles sponsor research agreements, and there is also another agreement which is called research service agreement. I think that sounds like similar to something that Nelly mentioned about maybe just having researchers at UMass doing a project, maybe involving using more companies' materials. Things like it could be a research service project like that, and we also do MTAs with companies, and of course licensing. Right? So there are just different ways to work with companies.
Yeah.
One thing I'd add to that is that you know when you talk to, you're not talking to professor, you're actually talking to the university. So you do want to get in touch with the tech transfer office and bring them into conversation sooner rather than later. Professors can't really sign these things unilaterally. It has to go through the university, and so you know, negotiating with the professor and then finding out that the professor doesn't actually know the university policy for some of these things could end up being, you know, a huge time sink. And most professors, you know, don't know or don't pay enough attention to these things to be able to sometimes tell you what the university would actually be willing to sign or, you know, give you in terms of IP or things of that nature. The other thing to keep in mind is, you know, the whole mission of a university is to disseminate knowledge. That's kind of why most universities are around. So, you know, you can do things like file patents and file IP and stuff like that, but you do have to keep in mind that a fair percentage of what you're going to be telling them is going to end up published, because that's kind of the reason why the university is around.
So I'll just want to add one little thing as a note for you, Jose, that you can follow up with Karen or somebody else at another time. There are other ways, and I don't think Nelly mentioned this one, but for example, the National Science Foundation has these things called IUCRCs, where they're focused around a particular industry problem, and companies can participate. And it's a variable level of participation. So it's not you going it alone, but there's a very specific IP structure. Whether that has any value for you, I don't know, but that's yet another way to leverage some, university smarts.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Beth, and that and what everyone else is saying, I think, is that there are some general rules of thumb for working with universities, but each university is also special and has its own character, has its own maybe advantageous ways of working with it and other ways that are not so advantageous. And so you really have to figure that out and absolutely be thinking about the contract and about who's able to negotiate that contract with you and put it in place to make it both a great project for you and a great project for the faculty member who is engaging in it. So that's,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, just wanted to say thank all of you so much for this feedback. That was all incredibly helpful. I've begun the conversation with the tech transfer office with this university and professor, but I'm also beginning conversations with some professors here at Umass, and so I think I'll be talking with you, Ling, sometime in the near future, I hope. Thank you all.
Thank you, Jose. Brian, we will maybe come to your question about getting a PhD either after at the end, or I'm happy to speak to you about it. We're happy to speak to you toward the end, but I want to get to Nadar's, and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing your name correctly, question. Nadar Nagavi, would you please unmute and ask your question, or let me know that you'd like me to ask it for you?
Sure, yeah. Thanks so much, everyone. Yeah, my question was more on the patent application. So let's say I'm working with a company, and the company is doing some innovative technology development. And I was wondering at what point during this development we should start filing a patent application. As soon as we have sufficient information that we have innovative stuff to patent, or just we have to wait until we have more to patent and like wait until the project is complete.
Yeah, so let me, on behalf of the panel, let me try to tease out. So you're thinking about a company that is, are you thinking about research that you're doing in the university and you're starting to think about a company, or are you thinking about a company that's independent of the university that either already has intellectual property or doesn't have any? Give us a little more of a scenario, please.
Well, I think it could be any of those cases, but let's just consider the case that the development is done in the university. And if there's any differences between the universities and the companies at that point, or if the university is working with a company, what other details should be considered there? But let me just ask the question again. What if the development is done in the university?
Okay, so let me ask Ling to start.
Yeah, sure. So when university is working with a company on a specific project, usually that work is done under a sponsored research agreement.
Mm-hmm.
So there is specific language in the agreement that talks about how IP should be handled, either background IP or foreground IP, and mostly it will definitely address foreground IP. So if you think an invention has already been developed through the project under the sponsored research agreement, I think the best thing to do is to, again, tell TTO about it. And so, we can help you to fill out an invention disclosure form, so we can make an evaluation to see, if maybe there's more work that needs to be done, or maybe there is already sufficient information. But in any case, according to the standard, SIA sponsored research agreement with the company, university is supposed to inform the company of any invention that we received from our, disclosed to us by our investigators at university. So we will take these steps. We can review your invention, we can inform the company of the invention, and we can make a determination as to whether an invention, whether a patent application should be filed. Usually also in the contract, it will have language that says, company can either basically ask university to file patent application at company's expense, or the company may tell university, no, we don't want a patent application to be filed. And at that point, university can make a determination whether we want to invest using our own funds to file patent application. So if you are not sure whether the invention has been fully developed, I think it wouldn't hurt just to contact us, contact our as a TTO, so we can, basically discuss with you and to see what you have. And then we can make a determination at that time.
So I have a follow-up, but I want to see if anyone else has anything else to add to Ling's question first.
Yeah, I think I can speak a little bit in terms of the patent timing on that, and it's one of those things that there isn't a sort of bright line into it. The risk if you file too early is you don't have enough data, you don't really have a convincing story for the patent examiner, and then you end up tied up in prosecution because the examiner just doesn't believe what you've given to them is actually going to work the way you say it does, and so forth. On the other hand, if you wait too long, you could get scooped, right? There could be another research lab out there doing something very similar, they're doing similar types of work. And if they file the patent before you do, well, they get the patent and you don't, oversimplifying a little bit. But essentially, it's first one to the patent office with the invention is the one that's going to win. So if you wait too long, you could get scooped. So that would say you want to file sooner rather than later, right? And then becomes a balance between the two. And the information that you have that might convince an examiner is going to vary tremendously based on technology. If you have something that's a very simple mechanical invention, you can draw a picture of it on a napkin and convince people that it will work the way you say it does. You actually don't really need much more than that. On the other hand, if you've got an invention that's going to cure cancer or get rid of the coronavirus, right, a napkin isn't going to do it. You're going to need a lot more data than that to convince an examiner that this is actually going to work. So, if you read on the internet and you read these sort of information things, it ends up being very fuzzy because it becomes technology specific. That's sort of one consideration. The other consideration is going to be a commercial sort of consideration, which is that, does it make sense for a company to file a patent on it? Is it something that's going to be something that prevents competitors from coming into this space? Is it going to be something that's going to be impossible to police? And all you end up doing is telling the world everything you invented without getting anything in return. And those kind of decisions. If you're talking about a university, another thing that comes up is, publications and the push to always, have professors publishing stuff. That sometimes dictates the timeline because there's a conference coming up in a couple of weeks, or there's a publication coming out, and, you have to get the patent filed before any of this stuff happens, or else, you won't be able to file the patent. And that might sort of dictate what you have to do and what your timeline is to do it. So, these are examples of some of the things that come into play. So it's hard to say, you look at factors 1, 2, 3, and 4, and this is how you make a decision. It usually ends up becoming a combination of factors, and you have to evaluate each one carefully.
So this is where I'm going to put in my shameless plug for a couple of resources. First of all, I-Core, which Beth works on at MIT and I work on here at UMass Amherst, where you will, if you are thinking that you have something that might be exciting, I-Core is a way to go out and test whether it's exciting without actually talking about your technology at all. So you can start to think about, are there other ways for me to get some insight beyond having to go and tell someone all the exciting science I'm doing. And the other thing is to say that as a UMass researcher, there are other resources that you can access, you don't have to have an invention to go to the TTO. I know that because they spend a lot of time talking to people before you might be ready, but they can really help guide you to what you need to do to get the data, what data you might need to file a patent, how you can talk to companies before you're able to do that, and really help you think through. You can also sign up for IP law office hours if you want to talk to Tani about some of those things. So there are resources, and they can help you without you having to give away your secret sauce. Nella, go ahead.
So to give a few concrete examples of how that happens, so our original IP was developed with funding from the NIH, which means that the moment we got the grant, we had to file a provisional because that is a public disclosure. For us, that meant that all the data that we had to go in. I honestly wish often that I could go back to that time and then redo that first provisional, because I've learned a lot since. So I think as a researcher, often you suddenly hit a public disclosure. We had already talked with Burnley before, with the TTO at Umass before, so they knew what we were doing. In one point, also getting $1.5 million from the NIH really helped, saying like, okay, this discovery has value. Because while you can disclose IP to Umass, Umass still has to be willing to patent it. They can say no, and then you can do it yourself, or they can do it. And getting a grant or anything will certainly help convince that your invention has value because it's validated by an external source. Now at the company, it's knowing your field and knowing when to. As Tani said, you can be too early and then just give it all away. And you want to wait as long as possible, because the later date on that provisional, the later date on that patent, the longer you have patent protection. So waiting there until you have enough data to convince the examiner is valuable. But yet again, you can be scooped. So knowing what your competitors are doing and knowing the field there is very important. I think one of the things that they've talked a lot about is that professors publish. One of the nice things about publishing is that once it is published, it is, I can't come up with the word, Tani, I assume it's already out there. So nobody can patent anything about it. So one of the protections mechanisms we use is once our patents are filed, we publish it. Or once we get our patents, we publish it, because that means that other companies cannot. It's prior knowledge, it's out in the field. And we have used that for some of these mechanisms as a form of protection that, you can't do this anymore because we have already published it. So I think that you really have to think and talk with we've talked a lot with TTO, we've talked with some lawyers to develop a strategy about when is your IP ready, and it's going to be case to case. Like indeed, some inventions are easy and it's going to get easy to file it. I mean, we have to have a lot of data before we can convince someone that our patent is new and it will actually work. So you have to have that time to gather that data. As a researcher, though, if you're still at the university and you want to file a patent, or you're going to write a grant and you might get that grant, just think about the commercial consequences, even if you're never going to use it. I wish that in 2014, when we filed this, I would have thought of the commercial consequences and I would have made some different decisions. So that's the one advice that I have there.
That's great advice, and thank you for your honesty and forthrightness. Caitlin Suarez, can you just ask your very straightforward, I hope, and then I'm going to ask, we're almost at time, so I'm going to ask each panelist to come up with a tidbit to share as sort of the words of wisdom that you want to end on. So, but Caitlin, first go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, when you make like an NDA, can I just print one online and say, hey, sign this, and we can talk now? I mean, is it that simple, or do you have to get lawyers involved?
I'm going to answer from my experience. It all depends on the nature of that relationship. There are very straightforward, simple NDA forms, right, that you can put in place. And as Tani said, there's mutual versus one way. if it's something more complicated, you know, about the relationship, I think it wouldn't be a bad idea to consult somebody.
Okay.
See, Tani's agreeing with me, so there you go.
Thank you.
Billable hours there.
As someone who did not have money for lawyers in the beginning, I think read a few. There's quite a few NDAs online, and you can read it. Actually, if you email me afterwards, I'll send you ours. I'm happy
Thank
to
you.
share. So the first 3 years, we read a lot. We got some from French companies that wanted to help us out because NDAs are freely shared among friends, apparently. And once you read a few, you'll start to see where the details are and where the differences are. And I am not a lawyer. So now, while we are getting some more advanced, we if we do work with major companies or so, we will have our NDAs reviewed. If we're doing a quick, like we have a molecule, we might be interested in working with you. Can we have a preliminary interaction with another lab or another biotech? I will much quicker review it myself and see.
Mhm.
It really depends on who's behind it and who you want to talk to. So Beth, I think you made a good point there. But yes, the power in NDAs is not, it's in the writing, but it's also in the fact that you can go to court. If you have to have the funds to go to court and go like, okay, it's patents and NDAs gives a sort of protection. You think like, now they can't touch us. Yes, they can. You have to be willing to, they're just ways to drag people to court to, you know, get what you want. And that is scary, but that is what it is. There are documents that protect you if you're willing to drag them to court.
Got it. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to give my 2 cents. From my perspective, I think if, as an entrepreneur, if you like to disclose certain of your confidential information to another party, I really would encourage you to have your attorney to prepare and review the NDA before it gets signed. Another thing is that, you know, each individual who will make this either, you know, to disclose or receive information under the NDA, I think should review the NDA carefully before making an you know, such disclosure or before, you know, receiving information. That is because, you know, you need to understand your obligations under the NDA, right? So before, you know, doing that. So for example, usually in mutual NDA, it says, you know, if you are to disclose any confidential information in writing, you need to mark your information with the word confidential. So after, let's say, an NDA is signed and you provide some kind of written confidential information to the other party, but you didn't really mark it, and you don't do any marking, and such information will not be considered confidential information under the NDA. So I think it's very important to not only to have an attorney reviewed NDA before it gets signed, and also, you know, for each individual who's going to disclose or receive information to read the NDA carefully, sentence by sentence, before disclosing or receiving any information. That's my perspective.
Thank you.
Tani, any last words?
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, it often comes down to sort of a risk assessment or risk judgment. And I really like what Nelly said is that, yeah, there's some things where it's like, if things don't go well with it, you know, nothing bad really happens. We're going to look at this drug, you know, we haven't done any work on it. It's this molecule this other company has. So, you know, not a whole lot happens. Or it's something like, well, you know what, the patent is going to publish on it next week anyway, so it's not that big of a deal, right? There's others where it's like, yeah, these could be very damaging to the company, and those are the ones you absolutely would want to have, you know, legal review over, some lawyer reviewing it, because it's going to be a huge risk to the company. You know, the other thing in terms of getting stuff off the internet is you have to be very, very careful, because there's a lot of weird stuff on the internet. And, you know, you've certainly seen the cat videos and all the other misinformation on the internet. You know, legal documents have its own category of misinformation, widespread misinformation. Some of it's accidental, some of it's deliberate. People, for example, will post NDAs that are applicable in some jurisdictions, but not in other jurisdictions. And so you might be signing something that works in Australia, but doesn't work in the US, right? And you would not know that. And that's not deliberate misinformation, but it's, you downloaded something off the internet that you probably shouldn't have been looking at. And somebody who, you know, somebody who's done this would have said, well, you know what, this is not appropriate for the US, or, you know, whatever reason.
Well, so I have one last point myself to make on NDAs, and we are going to be at time, but Ling Shen has his hand up. So before I ask my NDA or say my NDA comment, can our panelists I don't want to keep you beyond 3 o'clock if you cannot stay, but indicate a thumbs up if you can stay, please, for a few minutes. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Tani. So I just want to, the last point I want to make with about NDAs is be sure you're allowed to sign it yourself. So if you are an employee at a company or a professor at UMass or a graduate student at UMass, you're, to Tani's earlier point about agreements are with the university or with the company, not with individuals. Make sure that if you're going to sign for a company or for the university, you're authorized to do that. And also make sure that the person who is signing on behalf of the other party is authorized to sign. And that sounds so trivial, but it comes up. So Min, thank you for waiting so patiently. Would you ask your question?
Yes, I mean, I have two questions. The first question, and then I cannot stay for very long, right? I can ask question for Tanya a little bit later. So I'm really curious about a startup. So I have a situation I'm thinking about, like, even technology, I'm thinking about have a startup to work on it or collaborate with already very established company to work on it. What do you think about these two pathways?
Go ahead, Beth.
Actually, so
yeah.
I'm going to combine an answer to this with what I would offer as my tidbit. All right. Because all this stuff we've been talking about, you guys, it's messy, right? I mean, there isn't just like, here's step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, go do it, right? I mean, there's a lot of feeling around. But for me, as I've experienced it and I see it all the time, the real value is in understanding the problem and who thinks it's important, how big that problem is. That's the real, secret sauce that's a little different than what we've been describing. So understanding that and then knowing that your solution is going to be geared towards that, I think is one of the most important things that you need to understand. And if you have that information, nobody else has that. That isn't something you publish or anything else. So that's a broad answer to what you asked about Min. But I think others have some other things, but there's a lot of considerations on whether you do something yourself or you're going to partner with somebody. So that's, that's a whole thing. I'm sure UMass has some resources to help there, right, Karen?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, one of the resources is come talk to me, come talk to the GTO. And the answer, I would also say it's messy in that the answer is not always one or the other. Sometimes it's both. Sometimes it's there's some part of it that you need to do yourself and some part that you're going to partner with someone to do. Right? Nella mentioned their partnership with Boehringer Ingelheim. They're a company building on UMass foundational IP and foundational research, but they're also now thinking about partners. So
yeah, I probably in the next couple of days or weeks, I'm going to bother you. Yes. And I have another question about the patent. So especially Tanya, you mentioned intentionally can patent, for example, like as wave guides, all kinds of different wave guides. So you put in the patent and then nobody can figure out exactly which one, you are using. But my question is, I do see also patents do that, but then how could you convince that during the patent, like you're supposed to provide the data, right, to prove it works, but how can you convince you actually have tried all these?
You don't actually have to try everything, every combination in a patent. You have to have enough there that it's reasonable to believe that the invention could work in the way that you said it would. Not that you've tried every single possibility.
Oh, sorry.
Especially for I'm from a biological side, so some things we develop, it could be just a protein, we make a small modification, and then really that modification works really perfectly for a certain purpose. But then if you disclose, hey, I have changed that position to what, of course everybody can do it. But then to hide that information, you will say, I have changed, all the 5 positions to all the other 20 MSs, and then that would be already the combination is impossible for other people to figure out. But then how to put like a patent language to say I actually, have that's for me like what kind of data I should provide to say I think all these five positions I have tried, and all the other combination I also tried some of them, so that I can push the patent through without actually trying all these combinations.
Yeah, it's something where, just to keep it short, that you'd probably want to consult with a good patent lawyer to help you explore that and what you actually need and what you not, what isn't really useful and that sort of thing. And it also will tie into what the commercial strategy is that, is it really just that single protein? Is it other proteins that you'd want to protect, et cetera? So
Yeah.
it becomes a bigger conversation. It's not something that has a simple answer to it.
So can I add a little bit to this?
Yes, please.
It also really depends on your patent examiner. As
Yeah.
we went through, as someone who also works with biology, we have controlled mechanisms. And of course, you want to have every promoter that can do a very similar thing in that mechanism. So we have entire lists of promoters that we would like the patent examiner to approve, because that prevents other people from getting around our invention. So the advice that I got, and Tani, please correct me if I am wrong, is you claim big and they will come back and they will, like, I've had multiple ones. You can't claim all that. Show us what you are evidence for or why you think this would work. And so we have had multiple iterations with the patent examiners, like, this is why we think this should work. This is why we think this, this will be a similar effect. So you don't have to try every combination. You have to have a good reason why you think it would work. And also, like, how eager is your patent examiner? Are they just going to take like, yeah, that will probably work? Or are they more like, no, this is too much. Don't want to research all of those. You have to explain this better. So I feel that, and yet again, don't get me wrong, it was more of a hit and miss, spaghetti at the wall. You try to go broad and then you hope to get it all.
Yeah, I would say that's similar to my experience as well. Examiner quality varies. There's some really good examiners, and there's some that are not so good. There's some that are more generous, and some of those that are very stingy. And again, this is something where it's like working with a patent lawyer who's sort of been through some of these things and can tell you, you're right. It's a lot like trying to see what sticks. And so all you can really do as a patent lawyer is to say, well, here are the odds of this strategy working or that strategy working. But you might get the oddball examiner who just is stubborn for whatever reason.
So on that a little bit depressing note, I'm gonna remind you also that our tech transfer office, Ling and Burnley, are both PhD scientists, and they are there to help you think those things through, both from a technical point of view and then later on from a commercial strategy point of view, which you want to be thinking about as early as possible. So I want each person to have a little moment to share one tidbit. If you need to go, I understand that too. Let's start with Beth, although she said she already shared.
I already shared my tidbit.
Okay.
Understand who and why, and be solid on that as a real starting point.
Okay. Tani?
Yeah, I don't know if I have a single sort of tidbit. It would just be, understand how all these mechanisms work, because none of them are perfect. None of them are silver bullets. And the most important one is use your common sense in terms of, do you trust people with this information?
Ling? Any last word of wisdom?
The main thing I want to say is that Umass NBABS Tech Transfer Office is happy to assist our researchers, faculty members, postdoc students, and staff with any intellectual property related questions. So please feel free to contact us by sending us an email note to tto@umass.edu. Or you can look up for our individual contact information at our website. And another thing is we host monthly Tech Transfer Office hours on a Tuesday each month, and the next Tech Transfer Office hours Tuesday is March 8th. So you can email the Tech Transfer Office to set up an appointment with us, or for that particular day from 1 to 4 p.m. or any other weekday, which would be fine.
So you snuck a little commercial in there on me, Ling. Nayla.
I think what I would say is that it gets a bit easier, but after meetings, I still go like, "Ooh, I said too much. Oh, I shouldn't have said that." So I think, it's a process, and every meeting is going to be different, and you just have to keep in mind to, try your best, but it keeps being difficult even 5 years, in to what should you tell, what should you not tell. So it's not like there is no, according to me, and maybe I'm wrong, I don't think there is a right way. There's just, the way of least mistakes. And I hope I'm taking it.
I think that's a great way to end it. And I think the reason it's so hard is because there's a risk to not sharing, but there's a risk to sharing too much, but there's also a risk to sharing too little, because when you're building a company, and commercializing a technology, you really are trying to think about the impact, who's going to use it, who needs it. But you also need to be engaging. And so it's a real balancing act. So thank you all. Allison, can I ask you to stop the recording?